got in trouble and got fired. And so it seemed like smoking pot was the most important thing that all of us did together, other than play guitars. And so we ended up being on the streets with nothing else to do but to try to form a rock and roll band, because after all, the Beatles did it. And I think that was that. And then all of a sudden Jefferson Airplane was doing it right across the bay, so we had to do it too. And we were sure that we would. And we did. God knows how. God knows how. John and me and Jim Murray, I suppose, were kind of half-heartedly trying to get this band together to back Dino Valenti, which he was never around, though, to back. And a friend, quote, 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 who shall remain nameless because I can't remember his name. And anyway, it would be nice to tell on him because he was kind of forced by the cops because he would have gone to jail. Came and tried to score some pot from me, and all I had was some seeds and stems, so I gave him some, and he was wired. And the famous Jarrett Van Ram was outside, the narcotics agent, state narcotics agent, and he, a couple days later, came back and busted me one more time. And so there I went to San Rafael to the jail and went 30 days. They let me out of my own recognizance because they couldn't afford to keep me there for this lousy little pot bust. And I was on the streets, and I was in the park in Sausalito, and Jim Murray was there, and John Cipollina was there. Skip Spence was there, who ended up being the Airplanes drummer. So we were all hanging there, sleeping on, John could always go to his mom's house, but the rest of us would be sleeping on people's floors or something, like knowing we were going to have a band. We'd go over and rehearse with the Airplanes equipment over at the Matrix, trying out people. And then all of a sudden I had to go to trial for this pot bust. And I found myself in jail. And when I got out, in 60 days, Jim and John came and picked me up, and we drove around in John's old 54 blue Plymouth. I remember it. It was lovely. And he said, I ran into these two guys. Both of them had the same birthday. We could have this band. We were playing at this girl's house in her basement. So I went over, and there was Gary and Greg and Jimmy, and we said, well, this is obviously a band. This is ordained in heaven or something. And Murray and I got together and tried to figure out, what are we going to call this band? And I said, well, look, we're all Virgos except for you. You're a Gemini. We're all ruled by Mercury. So let's see, what do we make out of that? Since we're all into astrology, right? What do we make out of this? Well, Mercury, Quicksilver, it's the messenger god. We're all service signs, right? So let's see, okay, Quicksilver messenger service, right? Ha 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 ha. Nobody believed it. We tried to call it everything else in the world, but anytime we called it anything but Quicksilver, our amplifiers blew up. So we decided that was a sign from above, and we called it Quicksilver messenger service. What we did was we got Nick Gravenitis, who'd never produced a record before, and Harvey Brooks, who both played in the Electric Flag. And Harvey, I think, had produced a record before. So between them, they were going to come down and they were going to do our first album. And we kind of had some ideas. We'd heard how Beatles did things, lay down a guitar thing, and we had this song called The Fool. And we tried to lay it down with an acoustic guitar and overdub everything else, but that wasn't how we did things. And when we finally, Harvey mixed it all down, and we listened to it, and we said, nah, we can't do this. It doesn't sound right. This is a bunch of crap. So we said, we have to redo most of it. And Harvey said, I can't stick around for this. I've done my bit. So Nick finished it up with Pete Welding, I think. Pete Welding was, I think he wrote for Downbeat. He's a writer for Downbeat at that time. And he came in and just, somebody else for Nick to bounce things off of. And we just all mixed it down. And we went home and rehearsed the stuff rather than and played live for a couple of months what we were going to record, and went back down and finished the rest of it. John's guitar playing was different from anyone's guitar playing. I mean, it was, well, first of all the time I was playing with him, he would never have his hand off of his Bigsby vibrato bar. I mean, that was one of his trademark, was that no matter what note he played, it bent one way or the other. And the Bigsby is notorious for throwing your guitar out of tune. It isn't like the new ones that don't, it bends the strings and your guitar is out of tune. And so that was John's one trademark for those days, was his guitar was always out of tune. But if you're playing and you have your hand on the Bigsby, as you're playing the note, you bend it to be in tune. So that's where he got his unique sound. It was a result of his guitar always being out of tune, but the notes that he played became in tune because of the Bigsby. I remember one time being very embarrassed for quite a while that we spent so much time waiting for John to get his guitar in tune, between songs. And after a while, I started saying, well, what's the point? It's going to happen. He's going to tune his guitar for 5 minutes between every song, at least 5 minutes, so I just might as well relax and look around and see what's going on. And I looked at the audience, and they were absolutely fascinated watching John tune his guitar. And I suddenly realized that at this point in time and place, whatever we were doing was the show. And if we were tuning our guitars, it was cool at the time because the audience was right with us. The Grateful Dead would come out every now and then and dress like Indians and raid us and smoke all our dope. And then we had, I mean, this is how it was. They had this was the summer. We lived in Olima and the Grateful Dead lived in Lagunitas. They rented an old children's camp where all the furniture was undersized. You go over there for dinner, and you'd be sitting in your knees would be up in your elbows because it was set up for 7 or 8 year old kids. But it had a swimming pool, and so we'd always go over there. There were always girls there in the swimming pool, and there was always smokables and things. So we spent a lot of time over there. And so we had to get him back for raiding us, so we decided we were going to, us and Dino, who got out of jail and was hanging at the ranch, and we decided we were going to work up a version of Elijah Was a Wooden Indian, all dressed up like cowboys, wear bandanas over our face, and while the Grateful Dead were playing at the Fillmore Auditorium, we got Bill Graham in on this even. We were going to go up, stick them up, tie them to their amplifiers, take their instruments away, and sing Elijah Was a Wooden Indian and leave. We thought it was a great stunt. But unfortunately, it was the night of some of there were some riots, some race riots out in the Fillmore that very night. And there we were with a bunch of rifles in the back of the truck. And somebody reported it to the police, and we got busted before we even did it. So that wonderful prank never happened. So.